Hello and welcome to World Chats. Today I'm talking to one of Australia's most accomplished high-altitude mountaineers and the only Australian to have climbed all 14 8,000-metre peaks, the author of Summit 8000 and master of thin air. Welcome to the show, Andrew Locke.
Good, I've been. How are you?
I'm good, Andrew. We were talking, we've done a little bit together. We did some of your courses down near and attempting to get to Blue Lake during COVID times. We were talking prior to the show about how we had to race when COVID closed the borders. We had to race back to Canberra from where we were at Perisher just to get on a flight. It's been a little while. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been good, thanks. Fairly busy. Adventures at home. Done a lot of desert adventures in the outback of Australia and still some climbs overseas, which have been fun. So just broadening my horizons, getting a little bit of offshore sailing experience as well.
I love it. So it's not just about the lack of oxygen and the grandiose of precipice on the sides of mountains. You like more terra firma and some of the flat stuff as well, a multitude of adventures.
Yeah, I like to diversify. Mountaineering is great, but once I finish the 8,000ers, I sort of broaden my horizons to keep my interest alive and stay active.
And when you talk about it's easy to sort of, you weren't blasé about it, but it's quite dismissive. You've been through it. You've done the 14 8,000-metre peaks. How did that journey start for you as an Australian man?
I had an active childhood in the outdoors through Scouts, and my school had a fairly active outdoor club as well. But I found myself in my early 20s lacking direction when a slideshow came to town. I was living in Wagga in New South Wales at the time, and a slideshow came to town given by the first two Australians who ever climbed Mount Everest, Tim McCartney-Snape and Greg Mortimer. And I was about one of the about 20 people who turned up to the back room of a pub to watch the slideshow. And I was absolutely captivated by it. Decided then that I wanted to climb Mount Everest, and not realising that particular goal would morph into something bigger.
How far were you along that journey of doing anything in the mountaineering world when you sat down and you heard Tim doing that conversation?
Look, really, I wasn't anywhere in the mountaineering world. I was a very active and experienced bushwalker. I'd done lots of cross-country skiing, and I'd been down to Tasmania and rafted the Franklin River in an old rubber ducky. The mountaineering had not been on my horizon. So when these guys came to town and I saw that slideshow, as I say, I was absolutely captivated sort of by the drama, and even you could even say a little bit of the romance of this massive challenge to climb the highest peak on the world, which just hadn't ever occurred to me before, coming from Australia, not having done any mountaineering. But it was an absolute turning point in my life, and I moved from Wagga within a month. I was back from Wagga, living in Sydney, to give me access to the Blue Mountains so I could go rock climbing and learn to climb. And within the year, I was in New Zealand doing an alpine climbing course, developing those skills. And it was many years from then until I finally climbed Mount Everest. I took the path of learning to be a mountaineer rather than being guided. In those days, you couldn't be guided on Everest anyway, but even if I could have been, I would have chosen not to. So it took me, 15 years from when I saw the slideshow until I actually stood on the summit of Mount Everest.
I love the immediacy of the decision making though, hearing someone to motivate you, having the capacity and I suppose the sheer outright drive to say, this is my future, this is the way I'm going to do it. Did you have to turn at right angles to life and sort of change everything you were doing, or was it just a path that you sort of were following anyway in the creating Andrew Locke, the outdoor adventurer?
I think it was a fairly sharp turn in my direction. It was, as I say, I was a little bit directionless, but the concept of high altitude mountaineering and the time, the effort, the money, the entire lifestyle that goes into climbing those peaks regularly and building up to the point where you can even start climbing those peaks under your own steam. I didn't really realize at that point what a massive demand that would place on me. But the more I got into it and got into rock climbing and the alpine climbing, climbed around the world, building that skill and experience at ever increasing altitudes until I finally had a taste of high altitude. The more I did it, the more I loved it, the more I wanted it. And so it became self-fulfilling, really, in that I had found that direction, and it was the right direction for me.
It's interesting, the absolute contrast, I suppose, of modern day Everest mountaineering. I've spent a lot of time in the Khumbu. I've never been above Camp 2, but just knowing now how, I think circus is probably an an under appreciation of what it takes to do the journey to the summit of the tallest mountain in the world. What year is this, and sort of how long was it before you first started to get yourself hanging from ropes?
1980, I reckon within a month I had applied to move back to Sydney, but it probably took a little bit longer than that. I don't recall exactly. But I
Yeah.
initiated that move back to Sydney through my work as quickly as I possibly could. And as soon as I was in Sydney, I joined the Sydney Rock Climbing Club and was dangling off ropes in the Blue Mountains shortly after.
Did you find a sidekick? Did you have someone who was along for the journey with you, or was it very much join the club as a sort of solo climber, come in and then find your cohort?
Yeah, no, I didn't have a sidekick. It was very much about joining the club. And for me, it was about skills development, understanding what was involved in rock climbing and what skills I would need to then transfer to the alpine environment. And I think to become a good mountaineer, you must have a good solid base of rock climbing to have those
Yeah.
skills down pat. And so by the time I went to New Zealand, probably a year later, I had been rock climbing and training in my every spare minute of every day for that year. So whilst I never claimed to be a good rock climber, I was certainly
Hmm.
knowledgeable about how to rock climb and how to use the gear.
How did you deal with the early days of exposure and sort of overcoming the fear factor? Was it literally the number of hours on the faces that was giving you the less and less, fear factor of that? Or how did you sort of come to terms with it? It's always the thing you hear about is how you get over that hurdle of not worrying about what's down, but what's up.
It does come with time, with experience. As I say, I would never claim to be a good rock climber, so I had plenty of falls. And
Yeah.
and you very quickly learn to trust the equipment. And when you first start, of course, I was following other people up the rock until I had developed the skills to enable me to lead and take that
Mm.
risk of falling. And I had to learn how to place the protection in the rock to safeguard my climbing. But that takes time. It took a few months until I was regularly leading. And of course, I fell, but as my protection held and I didn't kill myself, I grew a confidence with that. That then enables you, having that confidence enables you to take leaps forward and really extend yourself and push yourself, which mountaineering requires. And so I very much enjoyed that on the rock faces as well.
The step from learning in the Blue Mountains to going and doing your first ice climbing, I suppose, in New Zealand, with big drops and stuff. Where's the next step after sort of New Zealand? Where did the wow factor kick in so much that you actually sort of were almost not overwhelmed, but wowed to the degree where you went, I'm really a rock climber now?
Well, I don't know. Again, I would never call myself a great rock climber, but the wow factor definitely came in the mountaineering world. When I went to New Zealand and I did that mountaineering course with a company over in Mount Cook Village, which was fantastic. It absolutely blew my mind with the scale, the enormity of those mountains, and that was only in New Zealand, climbing up, less than 4,000 meters in altitude. But the mountains there are big and they're fairly wild and they're tough and conditions are generally poor. So it was
Mm.
a great learning experience. Reaching the summit of a few peaks during that course was just such uh, uh, a growth experience. It was such fun. And I immediately joined. I was a member of the Army Reserve at that time, so I immediately joined the Army Alpine Association,
Yeah.
which then enabled me to join some of their adventurous activities, which included expeditions around the world. And so with them, I made my first overseas expedition, which was to Denali in Alaska.
Was going to be my next question is where do you sort of set yourself as the first expedition star rather than an upskill session or an adventure away to a neighbouring country? Denali was the one where you'd said, okay, to get there is a real challenge. To get there, I've got to upskill myself enough to even think and consider taking it on. What was the sort of timescale and the journey like to get yourself even to the foothills?
Well, I was climbing on Denali within 2 years of, well, 18 months of starting to rock climb. So
Wow.
so I went
Wow.
and did my course in New Zealand and then I joined the team to Denali. So I was pretty green, but I had undertaken other multi-week expeditions, not in the mountain environment, but actually out in the deserts of Australia and heading up to Cape York way back in the day before the road was graded up there. And so I loved the expedition intensity, the long duration, the absolute requirement to remain resilient and focused and energized throughout that long period. And so the Denali expedition was a next step for me in mountaineering, but it was a logical extension of the other sort of expeditioning that I had done in Australia. And again, I was a very green mountaineer, but I loved that experience.
2 years in, it's pretty fresh to go and do something as big as that. Well, it must have been a steep learning curve, but also lessons that you then used to better and further your climbing career as you went on from that. Can you think of some of the sort of the mistakes that you stepped over and went past?
Oh God, the list is so long. I Firstly, I learned about cold. Denali was a cold mountain, certainly the coldest I'd
Yeah.
experienced. I needed to vastly improve the gear I took. I had a medical incident on the mountain. I burst a blood vessel in my head, and so that was an altitude experience. And so I realised that I had not acclimatized as well as I perhaps could have.
Mm.
That in fact I learned I was a slow acclimatizer, and even throughout all my climbing career, following that expedition, I always gave myself a couple of extra weeks of acclimatization in the foothills of mountains before actually climbing on them to ensure that I was properly acclimatized. I just seemed to be a little slower than other people. So that was a lesson. Learn not to be impatient with the mountains. We dragged sleds on that mountain, and whilst they were okay pulling up the hill, going down, they were cheek toboggans. They kept overtaking and rolling over and pulling me down, and I lost my temper at one point and kicked this sled off the side of the mountain. And of course, instead of going straight down onto the plateau where I wanted to go, it went sideways into a massive crevasse field. And then had to go tiptoe my
The
way
lifeline
across
of
this.
everything is suddenly gone.
Yeah, exactly. So I did never do that again.
The warnings of things like that happening, obviously you've sort of learned since then that you need more time to acclimatize. The people around you, the people at home, family that are seeing you going, you doing your first trip, and then you coming up with stories like that. Did they give you a bit of a knockdown to say, hey, is this really the right thing for you? Or was everyone just 100% supportive and you sort of were such a driven force, nothing was going to stop you anyway?
That's a funny question, Ben. I didn't ever ask anyone. I didn't have a strong support base when I got into mountaineering. Family knew I was doing it, but there wasn't a lot of interaction about it. And my friends knew that I liked to go off and have fun adventures, and I was just taking it up a level. And I guess they were interested in how it went, but there was never any counselling that accompanied that interest. So I'd report back that I was still alive, and then focus on preparing for the next one.
At what stage did you want to set out on the journey of climbing all 14? Was that after the successful summit of Denali, or was it always part of the plan before you even got there?
No, it was way down the track. The plan in the early days was simply to climb Mount Everest. Seeing that
Yeah.
slideshow, I was so inspired by that concept. And as I said, in those days, you couldn't be guided. So the mountain wasn't overwhelmed, it wasn't commercialized. The people on the
Mm.
mountain were climbers rather than, say, clients. And
Mhm.
so I was on that path to climb Mount Everest. And it was a few years after Denali. Denali was 86, 87, I beg your pardon. And my first expedition to any 8,000 metre peak was to Mount Everest, and that was in 1991. So it was a few
Right.
years later. I'd climbed a bit more around the world on 6 and 7,000 metre peaks. And then I found myself going to Everest, and that was unsuccessful. We had a pretty good accident in the team. And then on the summit push, only two of us. We're just a team of four, no oxygen, no Sherpas, no idea what we're doing. And we're
Sounds like a beautiful disaster waiting to happen.
well, well, it almost was. That was the expedition on which Mike Groom was avalanched 1,000 meters down the Lhotse face and
Yeah.
lived, which was incredible. I eventually made a crack at the summit with one other team member. That didn't succeed, so we came home, and then I had another crack at Everest a couple of years later, where one of the team was killed. So I then decided just to pull back and climb some other 8,000 meter peaks, and that took a number of years. So Everest was actually the seventh successful 8,000 meter summit that I achieved when I finally got to the top of Everest. And it was only at that point that I then considered that I might go for the full 14, because by then I'd done 7.
How does it feel that moment? So, yeah, because obviously there's testosterone, there's energy, there's acclimatization, there's all these forces that you've got and shaped and forged in the right direction to get you to a summit. When you've got to make that decision, is it a simple one where everything has overwhelmed you and you're just like, oh my God, I just need to turn around, I need to turn around? Or is it one where it's an overwhelming sense of, oh, God, I've failed myself. I mean, how do you deal with that momentary decision making of this is the time where we turn 180 and we head back down again?
When I've been climbing, uh, hmm, in the early days, I think I turned around earlier than I needed to, and I certainly learned very quickly that the disappointment of giving up lasts a heck of a lot longer than the pain of continuing. And on that first expedition, where my partner and myself were going for the top, my partner needed to descend, I probably could have kept on going. And I felt like I ought to accompany my partner down. But in retrospect, he probably could have got down by himself, and I probably could have kept on going. But whether or not that was the case on that peak. After that, when started climbing some of those other 8,000 meter peaks, I definitely found there are a few times when the weather was bad, the cold was intense, the team had given up, and I was left there and in a position of whether I could continue by myself, really put absolutely every part of me
Mm.
into the climb and keep on going, or back off and come back to fight another day. And a couple of times I backed off a bit earlier than I probably needed to have. And so I got to a point after a few years of climbing those peaks where I had to do a bit of self review because it was costing me a fortune. It was definitely my career.
Absolutely.
It was costing me relationships, and I had to decide if this was really what I wanted to do. And if it was, as I decided it was, then I needed to really commit and allow myself no excuses for turning around unless the risks were absolutely categorically unacceptable. And unless it was that
It's a
at
big
the time.
moment. Yeah, it's a big moment, really, isn't it? When you've got obviously your own drive, the training, everything has got you to that point. There's obviously in the early days where there's sponsors involved as well, because there's that turning point of, oh, who am I letting down by doing it? This was just self-funded. This was you. So you very much Andrew is the only person he's having to report to.
Yeah, that's right. No, I didn't have sponsors in those days. And, you know, to a certain extent, that decision making is impacted by your experiences to that point, and I was still
Mm.
relatively inexperienced on 8,000 meter mountains. I was feeling my way, and when better climbers than me were turning around for whatever reason, I felt that maybe I ought to be turning around as
Qualified it,
well.
yeah.
But that probably came. A little bit too easily, and I, as I say, I had to do that self-review and say, well, let's not be influenced by others. Let's make this decision categorically based on risk or difficulty. If the difficulty was beyond me, I just didn't have the skill to climb something, that was acceptable. If the risk
Mm.
was categorically unacceptable, that was okay. Then I'd go down. But unless it was those two things, from that point on, I determined that I would not give up, and I didn't.
Going down, getting back to the home country, how long does it take you? I mean, a lot of people are always thinking about their next adventure in the tail end of their current adventure. That's the way the adventurous mindset works, is you're in the
Yeah.
vacuum and you're going, okay, what do we do next? Is it really in the journey back to Australia, wherever you're living at that stage, that you're thinking, okay, how do I get back to there? How can I do things better? I've learned my lesson. I've pulled myself out. I need to get back there. How do you keep finding that drive?
Yeah, I missed the mountains. From the moment I turned around and started down climbing, I was already missing the
Mm.
mountains and thinking about how I could come back and do it better. And
Yeah.
that was on those early peaks where I might have turned around a bit early. On subsequent climbs where I did succeed or I was beaten because the climb was too difficult, I was immediately planning a return and how I could do it better.
And that's the next year, ideally? You get back into another
Well,
season, or you're trying to find somewhere else that you can get back to quicker on the opposite hemisphere?
no, well, the 8,000s are all in the same spot. And once I
Of
got
course. Yeah,
into that
sorry, yeah.
8,000 meter climbing, I was pretty well locked into that South and Central Asian part of the world where the
Yeah.
8,000ers reside. I certainly did multiple expeditions in a single years over the period. It was a little bit dictated by my employer, whose opinion I regarded less and less as time went on, and as the climbing really did become my life. So yeah, some years I'd do 2 expeditions, 8,000 meter expeditions, each of which was
Yeah.
approximately 3 months away from home. So it's a big absence from.
Were you heading in from Nepal always, or were you going in from the China Tibet side? Were you a north or a south climber? Have you done both? How's your love and passion for the different sides?
Well, Everest is on the border of Nepal and Tibet, of course, as are a couple of other of the 8,000 meter
Mm.
peaks. Some of them are located up in Pakistan, on the border of Pakistan and China. Those ones I approached from the Pakistan side. Joy, OU, Everest, Kanchenjunga, they all sit on the border. And so I approached some from the Tibet side and some, just depending on the expedition, some from the Nepal side. And that was
Of all of those, the 14 8,000 meter peaks, there's almost a level of, yes, there's the elevation, which they gradually climb and climb up into the Everest summit, but there's also then the degree, in a way, of difficulty. And from a real alpinist, rock climbing, mountaineer's perspective, that comes with a degree of difficulty. Now, Everest is high, but it's not poo-pooed as a climber's mountain. But obviously, the modern era, with clients ascending on ropes with Jumars, very different game to putting them on a pedestal and putting them on a scale of difficulty. Which of those demand your greatest care, attention, and respect?
Yeah. Of course, any peak has, any of the 8,000 or all of the 8,000 meter peaks have lines on the mountain which are yet to be climbed because they're so difficult. But in general, what you're saying is right, that Everest sees the tourist lines up the easiest routes on the south and north sides of the mountain. Overall, P2 is labelled as the toughest of the 8,000 metre peaks and therefore potentially the hardest peak in the world. It's very steep. It's nearly as high as Everest. It seems to dictate its own weather patterns and has a lot of loose rock and ice that's constantly tumbling down. So that required a lot of respect. And my expedition to K2 saw, it was a 5-person team. Of the 4 of us who went for the summit, 2 were killed. So it is a tricky peak. Annapurna, I've always said, is the most dangerous of the 8,000ers. So that demands massive respect. Dhaulagiri, Nanga Parbat, they all have their challenges there. You know, every one of those 8,000 metre peaks is an 8,000 metre peak and therefore brings with it a significant amount of risk and deserves respect.
I think you said in the past that Annapurna is one of the climbs that you're most proud of, maybe because survival is the key to getting up there. What makes it so psychologically heavy, so difficult to sort of take on?
There isn't a safe line on Annapurna. Some mountains you may find the faces are heavily loaded with snow and ice and have seracs and crevasses or whatever, but you might be able to find a way around that. On Annapurna, there just isn't a safe route on the mountain. Every route appears to be overhung by massive seracs and big snow buildup. So you're working in an environment throughout the entire expedition of heightened risk, and you just have to accept a higher level of risk to climb that peak. And so it's a psychological game. I mean, I was psychologically worn out at the end of my ascent of Annapurna, more so than any other 8,000 meter peak. And it was so dangerous, and I saw people killed on that peak as well. So, you know, there are some 8,000 meter peaks I'd return to enjoyably, happily, but never Annapurna. I wouldn't set foot on that peak again.
A lot of the outfitters for the trekking, the low altitude, the mid and the high altitude now come from those areas where the mountains are. Were you, in the days when you were doing your early climbs, you were taking all of your gear with you? You're very, very much self-supported in every element?
Yeah, we took our own tents. We had all our own clothes and equipment. We had stoves, you name it, and we had the lot. And as the industry developed over the years, it became possible to use the support services of expedition organisers, like travel agents, really, to supply the gear up to base camp. But beyond base camp, we still had all our own tents and ropes and climbing equipment and stoves and food, you name it. We still brought all our own stuff. And I would still do that for my own climbing expeditions. But in the corporate world, the commercial world, if you're guiding less experienced people on less demanding routes, then it's a lot easier just to employ an organisation over there that will supply pretty much everything these days. Tents, you can even rent sleeping bags and down jackets or whatever.
Have the Nepali government just stopped the concept of self-supported on Everest? Have they just done that? As I think there was something that was talked about at the end of last season, that you'd have to go now with an outfitter, whether it was one of the internationals, one of the bigger Western companies, or whether it was one of the more local Nepali companies?
It wouldn't surprise me if they have. I haven't seen that announcement. I know they were talking about trying to encourage expeditions to go to other mountains than Everest.
It's a absolute polar opposite when you arrive at Everest Base Camp these days to the days when you first got there for your climbs. You know, the geo-dome tents, the artificial grass floors, the barista coffee machines. It's very much driven by the digital social media world. I have my views on it. I think it's, a bit bizarre and a bit weird, but that seems to be the industry now. What's your views on that as the game currently for Everest?
Look, guided climbing's been around since climbing's been around. If you think back to the Swiss Alps, people being guided up in their Lederhosen or whatever it was, up those mountains. So it's very difficult to draw a line in the sand and say where guiding should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed. I would like to
Hmm.
see the industry in the Himalaya better regulated, much as I would hate to see more regulation anywhere, but that's an industry that does require regulation. It is a massive source of income for the people of the Himalaya, and that's a great thing as long as it gets to the people of the Himalaya, not just into the government coffers. But I think it's really sad that the commercialization has grown to such an extent that there is a body now, a culture of rejecting the concept of individual climbers, private climbers who
Mm.
are seeking to
Yeah.
do interesting stuff on those peaks. And there's been conflict between commercial expeditions and private climbers on Mount Everest as the commercial groups really try to bulldoze their way up the hill. And I think that's a great shame. And the private climbers are the ones who initially succeeded on these peaks,
Set the
opened these
path.
peaks,
Yeah. Yeah.
then enabled commercialism to follow. So I really think in that environment, perhaps regulation is needed to ensure that those mountains are still available to private climbers to do it in fine style rather than just paying stacks of cash to be dragged up the hill.
Yeah, it's just it's almost it's become a tourism product in a way. It's being the tallest mountain in the world has its blessings and it has its curses that come with it. We almost wish that K2 was that little bit higher, just to sort of keep away some of the tourist trade and leave it with the purists. Where do the purists, the alpinists, the forgers, the pioneers go to get their fix? Where do they go now in the world to go and find those unclimbed faces?
Well, I'd hate to see. I mean, K2 is already commercially guided, so I'd hate to see that
Mm,
done any further. Yeah, the truth is there are thousands of peaks around the world that have still never been
mm,
climbed. Qatar, of course, has many of them. At the Karakoram, the Himalaya, Nepal itself is still opening up peaks of the 6,000 meter altitude and maybe still some in the 7,000 meter altitude that have never been climbed due to their technical difficulty. So
yeah.
they provide that challenge for the genuine climbers who want to get away and do something really remote, really impressive. And there are some outstanding climbs still being done by real climbers. But I think it would be nice if they could also then take those skills and experience to the 8,000 meter peaks if they wanted to and do outstanding things on the 8,000 meter peaks without grief from the commercial world.
Mm.
It'd be ideal if they could do that as well.
You obviously spent a lot of your life, or a percentage of your life, living in the death zone and working and operating in the death zone. For anybody that doesn't really understand it, and they might have heard the term banded around, where does the death zone start? What does it involve? What are the fears and the risks of being up there?
Yeah, I reckon the first step on any mountain is entering the death zone. But it's sort of really it's generally referred to as 7,000 meters plus, and
Yeah.
certainly 8,000 meters is well into the death zone. Some people might say it's 7,500 meters, but really what they're referring to is the altitude at which you cannot live for an extended period. So once you get up to that 7,500 meter or 7,000 meter altitude, you are dying more slowly at 7,000 meters than at 8,000. And at the summit of Everest, very quickly, you only have a couple of days perhaps at that altitude without auxiliary oxygen before your body literally just shuts down and stops working. So all those 8,000 meter peaks are called the death zone peaks because they are so high. But really, anything above 4,000 meters requires careful acclimatization
Mm.
and takes time for the body to change. And as I say, I'm a slow acclimatizer. For any of my peaks, I would go to the Himalayan trek for 2 or 3 weeks to give my body extra time to adjust. And then I found that on whether it be 6, 7, 8,000 meter altitudes, I could perform quite strong, having had that little bit of extra time to initiate the adjustment. People, it's amazing to see what's going on now with people pre-acclimatizing in oxygen
Yes.
tents,
I was
low
going to
pressure
ask about
tents,
this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's really
arriving
incredible.
for 7 days, literally arriving in the country 7 days before they're going to summit. I mean, seeing that it was a scientific
Yeah,
expedition. It was pushing the
sure.
boundaries of what humans can do. So people might poo-poo it, but it's just an evolution in the way that people can prepare.
Yeah, agreed. I wouldn't want to do that. For me, climbing the peaks quickly is of no interest. Following a line of rope up to the top of the mountain is of no interest. For me, it's always been about tackling the mountain on my own terms, and that involves acclimatization as part of that process, but also finding the route, placing the camps, overcoming the objective difficulties and dangers to finally, hopefully, succeed on the climb. Turning up now to a route that has been prepared by others with acclimatization that you've achieved uh, um, in, in some extraordinary way in a tent in your home, or by breathing all sorts of funny gases, is of no interest to me. But it is an evolution of the industry, and each to their own.
You made a conscious choice to do the summits of the big ones without oxygen as far as you possibly could. Was that down to, technology not being as readily available, or was that just something you'd said from the get-go, I want to get up to the top of these under my own steam as much as I can?
I was always about doing it under my own steam. Again, if I knew that I could climb any of those peaks, I wouldn't have bothered climbing them. It's always been about the challenge. So using oxygen was never in my mindset for climbing the peaks under my own steam. When I led commercial teams, then it was my requirement that everybody use oxygen just for safety, risk mitigation, and that included me. But for my own private expeditions, using oxygen was never an option. It just detracted from the challenge.
The tipping point then from the Andrew Locke personal journeys to get to the summits to the Andrew Locke running an expedition company to help and assist people get up there. When did that sort of happen in your journey and the timescale of doing this?
When the peak fee went from $3,000 for an expedition permit in 1991 to $10,000 for an expedition permit in 1993 to when I came back in 2000 and it had gone up to $70,000
Nuts.
for a piece of paper before any of the cost of the expedition, and I couldn't afford that. So luckily, in 1999, I'd been climbing in Pakistan and met a British climber who had worked for a couple of those commercial operators, and he put me in contact with them. I then led a team for one of those British operators. And that was my way of getting back on the mountain.
It's nothing like building a business to supplement the lifestyle you want to lead, is there? Amen.
You know,
Mountains come.
I
Yeah, sorry, go on.
I think the mountain is overwhelmed now by numbers and poor regulation and the commercialism of the peak. But having worked in that environment just a few times, it does give me a good perspective of both sides of the argument, and that's both styles of climbing on those peaks. And so I'm grateful for that broader perspective, I guess.
Seems like every man, every woman, his dog, able-bodied, disabled, blind, with a wingsuit, without a wingsuit, skiing, fastest known times. It seems like it's just a different way now of trying to get up and get down the mountain. I mean, a headline-grabbing way as possible. It seems my take on it year on year.
Oh, look, I think the risk, to a large extent, the risk and the resilience requirements to climb Mount Everest have been taken out in the commercial environment. When I first saw these commercial expeditions arriving, and indeed when I led a commercial trip in 2000, there was rope put on the mountain where it was needed for the most exposed parts of the climb, and oxygen was used from the highest camp to the summit and back again. But now it seems that it's just about one long line of rope from base camp to the top, and you literally just hook on with your ascender and jug your way up. And oxygen is used from a much lower altitude and at much higher volumes in order to safeguard people's ascent or to make their climb as easy as possible. And that then confounds the crowds on the mountain, because to get all that rope and oxygen up there and additional equipment requires more staff, so more climbing Sherpas to ferry it up there. So you have more, it's more accessible to people, so more people want to do it. They're paying more, and then they have more support. And all of which combines to make Everest the clown show that it is now.
The journey from base camp to the summit, if you're doing that final push, you've done your acclimatization rotations, you're then on that final push, you sort of put on your crampons at crampon point, you put the head torch on, you look up at the Khumbu Icefall. Is that the fear factor where the Khumbu Icefall is, or is it still from Camp 4 up to that summit where you really, as you in your days of climbing would go, this is where I've got to breathe really deep and be the best I can?
Yeah, certainly the summit day is the most demanding part of that climb. The Khumbu Icefall is dangerous, and thankfully when I was there on several expeditions, but a fair while ago and before the massive crowds now, we could move quickly through the Khumbu Icefall. And when I led that first expedition, that first commercial expedition I did, I held my team back for a week, and we actually played in the icefall below the start of the climbing to get our acclimatization as strong as we possibly could and to practice our techniques so that once we entered the Khumbu Icefall, we could move through as quickly as possible. It is a dangerous place. Those seracs collapse without warning. You can hear the whole glacier is just shifting and moving, and you can hear it groaning and creaking, and then suddenly an ice cliff right beside you might just collapse, and the one you were just standing on might collapse, and of course the one in front of you might collapse as well, and that's not a place you want to be. So that is certainly the highest objective risk, I think, on the mountain on the south side, on the Nepal side. But in terms of just absolute commitment and pushing oneself as hard as one can, that is the summit day. You get, even with oxygen, you're in such a rarefied atmosphere. Your body is working so hard that that desire just to quit and go down and save yourself is stronger than you can imagine. And so one does have to dig deep to keep on going.
It's a headspace I know I'm never going to get myself in. I was privileged enough to have 3.5, 4 months filming from base camp at the base of the Khumbu Icefall. I was there with a documentary crew. I sat there and watched it on a daily basis, and we filmed the head torches going up through, and you can hear the deep, deep bass-like cracks and grumbles of the ice fall, of the glacier that you're sitting on. Until someone gets there and experiences firsthand, it's almost hard in words to portray the scale of an ice block is an ice block. It's not something that falls out of the scoop on your freezer. It's 5 or 6 or 10 stories high. Maybe use your most poetic terminology to describe what it's like to be in the guts of it.
Terrifying.
That's all it needs. That's literally probably all it needs.
That's all it is. It's not a place you want to be. You find as you acclimatize, you can climb more quickly. I very much enjoyed that process of getting through it, going as quickly as I could in fine style. But if there was an issue, a climber was slow, or a ladder needed repairing, or the way was blocked because the serac had collapsed, then you might have to stop or slow down and be exposed to that danger for considerably longer. And unlike snow slopes, where you can make a reasonable assessment as to whether they may be likely to avalanche in a certain time frame, you can't do that with ice cliffs. They just let go when they let go, and you just can't work out when that's going to happen. So you're in a game of Russian roulette, and that you may be lucky and get through, and you may be unlucky. And so it's not a place I like to spend any time.
It's a place you describe as terrifying. It's a place, unfortunately, that's steeped in tragedy as well. It's a place where there's many Sherpas, and the Sherpa community have lost their lives there, and Western climbers alike. What's the sort of common thread between ambitious people in extreme environments? What's the common mistake that sort of these people make? Wrong place, wrong time, or something a bit more technical?
In the Khumbu Icefall? In the Khumbu Icefall, unfortunately, the approach to climbing the mountain has changed. So in the early days, when it was the climbers themselves who were fixing ropes up through the Khumbu Icefall, the route chosen and forced up to Camp 1, quite challenging. It was technically challenging because the climbers took the safest line away from potential avalanche slopes on either side of the icefall, and the line took the most stable ground, but it was quite tricky. There was lots of climbing up and down and around these cliffs and across crevasses and all the rest. It was slow, and it was technically challenging. When the commercialism came to the mountain, then for a long period there was a British company that would arrive at Everest first at the beginning of the season and would take responsibility of fixing the ropes through there. And other expeditions as they came would pay for that right to use those ropes. Eventually, that role was taken away from that company and provided to the group we now know as the Icefall Doctors.
Yeah.
Those icefall doctors had lots of skills and experience, but most of those have now, the originals have moved on, retired, died, whatever, and a younger set has come in with a different attitude to climbing and to opening that route, and the attitude seems to have been to make it as quick and easy as possible rather than as safe as possible. And so that's why we've seen the route move from the centre of the Khumbu Icefall to the sides of the icefall, which are far more exposed to avalanche danger from the sides of Everest, and to the less stable seracs, which have greater tendency to collapse. So hopefully that is changing as more pressure is put on the commercial
Mm.
groups to find the safer lines up the mountain. But certainly there was a period there where I mean, I was there in at 2014 or 15, whatever it was, and the big Serac collapsed. I saw
Hmm.
where the route had been put in, and I was flabbergasted that they had put the line so far to the side in such a high risk area. And of course, then the avalanche occurred, and a number of
Yeah.
people perished.
When you are Andrew Locke, leading an expedition and you are up there, how do you as an individual make, you're sleep deprived, you've got a lack of oxygen, the brain isn't working properly. How do you condition yourself to make the good calls in those scenarios?
Well, I do draw on a lot of years of experience, but when I'm leading a commercial team, my every decision is about the safety of the team. Safety first,
Hmm.
no matter what, and then only then will I consider what needs to be done to give the team the best chance of success. But I have no problem at all in turning a team around, my clients around, if I consider the risks are growing too high to be acceptable. So as
Um,
I'd like to think I've got a reasonable degree of experience in that decision making.
do you, when you're going back to a mountain with clients and you're working with a local operator, do you have an established teammate, an established lead guide that you always love going back to, or do you like to sort of move your team around? I mean, what makes that good expedition teammate?
Look, it really depends on how. If I'm working for a company, then they have their regular operators that they use in those countries, and I find myself obliged to use that team. So at the end of it, whilst I may be using a local guide, I go as the leader. And irrespective of the guide's recommendations, I will still make the final call about whether or not I deem the risks to be acceptable or the proposals to be appropriate for the team based on its skills and experience. And so, unfortunately, I've climbed with some really wonderful guides in those locations, and I'd love to keep climbing with them, but that just isn't always possible.
Yeah. Getting on to a bit more of the nitty gritty and the fun stuff in this one. When I go, we're leading a trip into the Arctic Circle in 3 days' time in the north of Norway. It'll be -25. It's dark. I know my go-tos when I'm in my pocket and I want to get my little grab bag out and I want to put some good fuel in my body and it's easy to consume, but it fulfills me. What are your little secrets? What are your nutritional or hydration secrets that you love to have tucked into your pockets?
I don't eat much on when I'm out there. I do like those little goos when I'm
Yeah.
really at the end of my tether and I need a little pick me up. I used to squeeze one of those into my gob on the summit day. But gosh, I set out at the start of a really hard day with a muesli bar and a water bottle in my pockets, and I get to my camp at the end of the day and I've got a muesli bar and a water bottle still full in my pocket. So I don't I don't really use those very much. But what I do find is that I'm a massive carnivore and I need my protein and so I quite often take some biltong with me, and I'll just
Snap.
have a little
Exactly what I
slice of
bought
meat.
yesterday for the Arctic. Exactly the same.
I find that's a real pick me up for me. Apart from that, if I can get a good coffee, all's a happy place.
Secrets to keeping your extremities warm. I've suffered the last 3 trips to the Arctic Circle. We've had temperatures ranging from -5 down to -45, and I've always come back with the blackened ends of the fingers. Maybe it's just
I've
me, maybe it's my DNA, but how do you avoid those extremities getting to conditions you don't want them to be in?
been really lucky over the years not to have suffered any real frostbite. Buy good gloves and good boots is what I'd say.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm constantly aware, and I monitor myself and my team if I'm climbing with others. And I've always taken the view that you can't put off warming a frozen digit until you get to camp. If you think, oh, I'll just keep going till I get to camp, it's too late. So the Lhotse
right.
face on Everest is one of the coldest parts of that climb. And I've always said to my clients as we've gone up there that, feel your hands are starting to freeze, you're losing feeling, then stop and we'll warm them up, because by the time you get to camp a few hours later, it's just too late. And I did find with my feet that whilst my toes would go numb very quickly on those alpine starts, extreme cold and extreme altitude, if I could feel that they're actually flexing when I try and wiggle them. Whilst I couldn't feel the ends of my toes, if I could feel them, that there was movement, then I was comfortable with that. If I couldn't feel
Okay.
any movement, then I would stop. And, I hung off the side of Makalu at 8,300 meters or something and took my boots off and worked my toes because I couldn't warm them up. But I knew that if I didn't stop and do that, as exposed and as unpleasant as it was, that was the only way to save them. So
They'd
I did that.
they'd be gone.
I still have my
Yes.
toes.
Yeah. I've invested in
Yeah,
some USB powered heated mittens this year. I've got a pair here in Oz I'm taking with me. I've got a pair from Europe that mum and dad are bringing across to meet me in Paris with on Saturday. So I am safeguarding as much as I can
nice.
this time because it's been 2 or 3 years in a row that I've done it now. When it comes to gear, are you one of the people I was speaking to um, people that have been involved in the adventure industry for a number of decades? Are you someone that loves to hold on to the traditionalist gear that you've started the journeys with, that you see evolve, or do you love embracing the new technologies of a new style of sleeping bag or a new style of whatever you might have in your pack?
Look, I'm too poor to keep buying new gear. If I'm getting sponsored with it, I'll happily use it.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm fairly traditional. The two bits of kit that I never leave home without are my shell jacket. That's the thing that keeps me alive more than anything else. Good, whether it's Gore-Tex or something else. My shell jacket, and I love multi-tools. I probably have the biggest collection of
Uh,
multi-tools in the world. So, whether it's a Leatherman or a Gerber or whatever it is, I just love
yeah.
those things. I love the gimmicks on them. And so I always carry one of those with me.
Love it. We're kindred spirits in that sense. The shell jacket has been something that has been my lifesaver in the Arctic for the last few years. And sitting inside both of the glove boxes of both these vehicles is a classic old Leatherman wave. And I remember picking up a tip from someone. I think it was one of the books that I read. Andy Ryan used to write these SAS books, and he said, you can never creep up on someone with a multi-tool if you've got it in a Velcro pack. Thinking about when you've got your gear, you've got everything ready. What's your sleeping system that you like to embrace? Are you someone that's now, got the liner, got the down? Do you sleep in merino? How do you stay warm on those coldest of nights?
I've always been a firm believer that when you sleep in those extreme conditions, there really shouldn't be any spare clothing in your rucksack. So
Mm.
I will take a sleeping bag that's just sufficient to take the edge off the cold while I sleep in my clothes.
Right,
So
right.
as I got older or more experienced on the mountains and started to get sponsorship and could start affording down suits, I would climb in my down suit, but it made no sense to me at all to take a down suit off in my tent to get into my -40 sleeping bag up on the mountain.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would carry a -10 or a -15 sleeping bag, which on its own would not be nearly warm enough to sleep in, but combined with my down suit would be just warm enough.
Yes.
And I'd put
Makes
on all my
sense.
mittens and my socks and all those things, because if I had anything spare in my rucksack at that point, then I was carrying too much gear. And
Yes.
weight is critical at climbing at high altitude. So I was happy to be, just warm enough. My mattress was only ever one of those closed cell foam mats, a ridge rest, which I would
Yeah.
cut in half. So it would only reach from my shoulder to my hip, because
Yeah.
they're the only two bits that needed, and everything in between that needed to be insulated. My feet could go in my rucksack, my head could go on a rope, and that way I could save bulk and just a little bit of weight. I had a few expeditions to northern Alaska in the winter in the Brooks Range, and that was cold. That was different level cold, much colder than the Himalaya. There we had to use a really interesting combination of vapor barrier liners and then sleeping bags and then BV bags over the top of that. But
Wow.
still, when we skied, the worst thing that could have happened was for us to sweat while we're pulling our sleds
Yes.
through this
Yeah.
brutally cold, -60 temperatures, but you can still sweat. And the worst thing you can do there is sweat. So we dressed absolutely minimally. We were cold all the time, but I'd sort of call it a comfortable cold as opposed to being comfortably warm. It was just a comfortable cold. It didn't stop us. It was just a bit unpleasant, but we weren't
Mm.
perspiring because we could not afford for that to get into our clothing, because once it got there, we couldn't thaw it out.
It's exactly that leads my brief in Tromsø in Norway when I talked to our new friends, our clients that have just arrived and talk about the value of good gear. And it's only when you get to those environments you start to realize the placement of the draw cords or the placement of the vents or the tensioners that are
Yep.
around the hood. All of those have been designed by experts in environments where they're required. And only when you get out there and you've got thick mittens on and you've got to grab this thing just to release the vent. It's almost like taking the lid off the kettle to let the steam out. Because the moment, like you say, when you
Yep.
sweat is the moment you go downhill particularly quickly. So evolution of gear must have been one of those things that you have witnessed get better and better for dealing with your internal thermostat in the moment.
Yeah, that's true. And it was never more relevant to me than in the Arctic in the winter. As I say, the Himalayas, it never really got any colder than -30, so that was quite manageable. But when we were dealing in much, much colder temperatures in the Arctic in the winter, every bit of gear was critical, and I experimented and discovered lots of new fabrics and new systems out there that I really wasn't aware of until I really until I absolutely needed them. And yeah, there's some amazingly lightweight, super quick wicking clothing out there now that's just generations beyond what used to be available.
Have you got one item you can think of to hand, a new bit of gear where you've gone, my God, how did I do without this?
Mm,
The
for my
pause
general
seems like you've
expeditions,
got a quiver of goodness already.
I'm just pretty happy with what I have. I have a system that works for me. Certainly in the Himalaya, I have a system that absolutely works for me. And I guess the shell jackets have become a little bit lighter, but overall, I don't have anything remarkable in my gear list. It's just solid and proven. Yeah, I guess the shell gear now has become so light that you can lighten your load. I guess, and that's probably where the industry
Yeah.
is heading these days. It's all becoming very light, which means you can halve the weight of your backpack compared to what it used to be, and that does make it a lot easier for climbing those big hills. Tents are light, the backpacks are light, the clothing's light. It just costs money. You've got the money, you can have it.
Recommend to me the name of a brand of a great tent designed for the tough environments. Maybe not hanging off the vertices of a mountain, but the ones that you would be comfortable, a good 4 seasons sleeping in the worst of the conditions.
Well, for high altitude, I'd go with Mountain Hardwear EV2, it's a single skin tent, absolutely bomber, and I used those tents on a number of occasions at high altitude. It was the best summit tent I ever used. For the Australian skiing and bushwalking conditions, I use Mont tents. I have a range of their
Yeah.
tents, terrible with model names, but I have a range of their tents for the conditions in Australia because they're made here or designed here and they're designed for our conditions. I think they're fabulous.
I feel like we've almost run out of time, but I do want to sort of bring it back down to the fact that you're not just a mountaineer, you're not just a rock climber. You go and adventure in many parts of the world. And prior to coming on the chat, we were just talking briefly about what's coming up next for you. Just talk to me about the stuff out in the outback of Australia that's happening.
Yeah, over the last few years, I've done a number of extended trips in the outback of Australia. I spent 3 months driving all of Len Bedell's tracks and the Canning Stock route and all that sort of stuff, just exploring. And I came to realise that it's possible to sail some of those rivers that get water following the floods up in the Gulf country as it gradually migrates down to the centre of Australia. And so I'm quite interested in taking my sailing experience, which has all been offshore to date, into the outback and taking a little catamaran to sail around the rivers in Central Australia once they get some water in them, which will be quite a different experience. It'd be
When
quite.
you talk about
You know, I
sailing,
haven't,
we're not
haven't
talking about a big keeled 40-footer. What's the vessel that you'll take to go and do that? Obviously, trailer bound.
Yeah, it's a trailer. It's a tiny little 14-foot catamaran. I know people have canoed some of these rivers, and I think I read a report about some people who did it either last year or the year before. But I think it'd be quite nice to sail and cruise around the outback. So
I love
I'm still
it.
sort of formulating that plan and learning how to sail a little cat. But I'd really like to give that a crack this year or next year. Squeeze it in between some other expeditions.
Is there anything that you fear these days? I mean, you've been up on the highest peaks, you've seen the biggest drops. What's the things that sort of make you nervous these days?
My bank account? No, not too much really. I will still approach adventure carefully. I love to have adventures, but I love the planning of it as well. So the management of risk is still very important to me, and I wouldn't do an adventure if there wasn't risk in it because it wouldn't
Yeah,
be an adventure. Um,
yeah.
so I will plan for that risk and then accept that risk. The risk might evolve during the course of the adventure, but that's okay. Well, I do find that when I get scared, if I think that I've managed the risk appropriately, then I'll just accept the fear and park it and move on. It's not to say I don't get scared. That's a normal human response, and so as long as I think I'm managing the risk okay, then as I say, I'll just park the fear to one side and move through it.
I've been lucky enough to be down in the Blue Lake area and down at Perisher with you a number of years ago. And I know that you do courses. I know that you run courses, you run adventures, you lead adventures. Where can people find out about what you do for the general public who are looking to start their journey or to increase their knowledge bank?
Well, the best way is find me online. My website, I have two of them. Andrew-lock.com is my speaking website, and Andrew Lock Adventures is my guiding website. So if people want to join me for an adventure, they should jump onto that one. And the other one, as I say, is my corporate speaking website. And yeah, I'll find all the info there, and they can contact me through those websites.
It's been an amazing chat, Andrew. Honestly, thank you so much for letting us lead vicariously through a lifetime of adventure. It sounds like there's plenty more to come still. You've taken us up to the oxygen-less atmospheres of the 8,000-metre peaks, to the red dust of the Australian outback. For anybody out there, if you love this chat, hit follow and share it with someone who needs to have a little adventure spruik in their life, needs to twitch that adventure muscle. If you're looking to gear or fuel your next big adventure, whether you are thinking about going and doing one of the 14 8,000-metre peaks, or just a camping trip for the weekend with the kids, check out worldearth.com.au. And we'll see you next time for more wild stories from the trail, the peaks, the road, and the edge of the map. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Ben.